Today I'm interviewed by Mellos, and as you can see, he's laughing because we've had a bit of a discussion off air. He's Australian, 24, plays centre mid. Today we're going to be talking about him, but also Australian football. Some really cool insights that he's already given me, and we haven't even spoken in depth about it just yet. I know he's a bit of a fan of my work. He said that to me before, and yeah, Gio, I welcome you to the show.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
You know what, right? 24 years old, Australian, and you're already, in these 24 years of you being on this planet, you've already achieved a lot, right? You've spoken about Greek heritage. You've spoken about a lot of things. For example, we've played in Sydney in the under-12s and beat AC Milan, right? Who has that? I've never had that. Other people definitely haven't had that. But go ahead and talk to me about yourself then. So you were just asking me some questions off there. So you want to go ahead and ask them now?
Yeah, cool. Just how's everything with your show been and yeah, just your podcast and growing and the awards, and how do you see the rest of the year panning out for you?
You know what, right? The year's gone so quick already, hasn't it? It's what is it? It's nearly September. Wow. Who would have thought that when we saw all the fireworks over London in January? No, you know what, mate? For me, it's been really good. I think it's been a really good few months. I've really cracked down in terms of getting people on the show like yourself. And of course, thank you for coming on today. And I actually did a podcast, I believe 2 days ago, speaking about my life and my journey. So what I usually do, I was getting asked the question. So it was a bit different for me. And that'll be out, I think, later this week. It's a 40-minute episode, so it's really good and in-depth. And I really appreciate Charles for letting me on. With the awards, the nominations closed today. So I have about just over a month. I think it's the 23rd of September. I think that's a Monday as well. They get announced as to whether I'm a finalist or not. When I'm a finalist, and I need more people to vote for me, and, you know, because there'll be like a list of people. It's my first time doing it. And then, yeah, I think we end up going to a football stadium and like an awards night or something like that. But obviously your votes and everyone else's votes are really appreciative. I'm not going to post about it again because obviously the nomination's close tonight. It's probably got all the votes in. If anyone else wanted to vote for me, then they would have done so by now. But yeah, mate, enough about me. Let's talk about you. So, Australian, 24 years old. Growing up, you were born and raised in Australia, but you had a Greek heritage, which is quite crucial in the family.
Absolutely, yeah. Sydney born and raised. But my grandparents are on both sides of my mum and dad from Greece. So yeah, I'm second generation. They came over after the Second World War and like many Greek migrants at the time, set up a fish and chip shop. Business was standard, you know, just looking for a better life really. And my mum and dad both are born here in Australia. So that means a lot to me. You know, I was born here, but obviously, you know, my ancestry and being attached to Greece means a lot and always has done. And especially in terms of football, like I didn't really have a choice in terms of the sport I wanted to play. Like it was football or nothing really. So obviously you remember Greece winning Euro 2004. So that was huge. Like at that time I was 5 years old. Having dinner, lunches at our places, just to be a huge talking point, and that's really kind of what kick-started things for me. So, yeah.
For me, of course, I'm British, and I've grown up in England, and of course, I've never ever had what you've had. So, like, half your family would have been from the other side of the world, in Greece, when you were in Australia. Do you think that changed your life in a way? Because obviously, you've still got to kind of keep in contact with them. You still got to maybe keep some heritage that they've also had. Obviously, for me, I don't know. So what would be different from your life being obviously from Greece, but living in Australia, born and raised in Australia with a Greek background, than for me, who's born and raised in Australia and live in Australia, for example?
Yeah, I think it's just seeing kind of the way of life. And how my grandparents used to live. I think it's a very different way of life. I had the privilege of visiting my grandparents' villages a few years ago before COVID. And it was so simple. It was just, you know, these villages up in the mountains, far from civilization, I guess you could say. And that was really eye-opening because, you know, Sydney is a big city in Australia and we're just so used to everything being fast-paced. But in Greece, I think having that heritage and that background taught me about family and how important family is and how important the little things in life are. Football, people identify with that. Much like, I guess, yourself in the UK, you know, football's a religion there, and South America as well, and places all around Europe. Just So yeah, that's how it differs to Australia. Australia as well geographically is so far from everywhere else in the world. So um, sometimes we can find ourselves to be quite isolated from different cultures. But having that part of the family really did help connect me in a way to my roots and to understand how my grandparents would have lived growing up. Very simple.
I think for someone like me, so I was born and raised in London, and I've now moved out to the countryside, to the villages, and it is a lot more slow paced. It's a lot more calm. I don't know what I prefer because obviously now I'm going back into London. It's now very hectic and crazy, and everything's moving at a ridiculous pace, and I'm not quite used to it yet. So of course that's going to take some getting used to, and it really is different. And I can't explain it. You have to kind of live in a village or a countryside for years, and then to go back to where you used to be. Because obviously I would have been fine back then. And yeah, it is really weird. So I've got to get used to that. You were influenced by Greek football culture. But what does that mean? Because everyone knows Greek 2004, winning the Euros, as you mentioned. And it was a huge family event. Of course, you would have still remembered some of the things that happened in that tournament, even to this day. But to be inspired by Greek football, talk to me what that means.
I just think, people who are Greek associate themselves with um, the bravery of the team that won the tournament, because I don't think anyone really would have called it. Definitely not against Portugal, and I think it represented so much for who we were at the time. You know, the Greek War of Independence coming out of Ottoman rule for hundreds of years, and it was a tough time. The two world wars, Greece was kind of in the middle of everything geographically, and the football was kind of an outlet. So when Greece ended up taking out that tournament, it was really a sign of resilience, and it was a sign of strength, and it really unified all of us. And it was really great to talk about.
You spent a lot of days alone training, and we'll talk about that in a moment, where you were kicking the ball against an old brick wall with some goalposts painted onto it. Something that, we still have in the UK to this day. And I look at it and think, who on earth has designed something so atrocious like this? I mean, I get it's I get it's cheaper to paint it onto a wall. I'm not saying that's the negative. I'm just saying it doesn't really benefit anyone to have it up against a brick wall. But whatever. I suppose it does with touches. Yeah. But who wants it on a brick wall? You said that you have early memories of Champions League nights with your father. Talk to me. First memories with your dad or mum or family playing football, watching football, and growing up around football.
Absolutely, yeah. So my dad's a Man United fan, so they were the first kind of memories I had as a kid. So after Greece, I started watching football with dad because he would get up and watch it. And I remember asking him, I was like, is it always at this time? Because for us, obviously, the Premier League's in the middle of the night. Yeah. So, and he's just like, yeah. And I made it a habit to get up and watch it because I was just so interested in it. And obviously Rooney had just signed from Everton at the time. That's about when I started watching, and he was just a monster. He was an absolute animal. And I remember as a kid just watching young Rooney running around, the pace he had, the power, the technique, the mentality. People were talking about Ronaldo and the shiny boots and all these quick fancy wingers. I was dead set as a kid. I was dead set on Rooney. He's the man that got me into football. I was watching him with dad and watching United, and I was like, that's the player. That's the player I want to be. Like it was big for me, and it got to the point where I loved watching the team so much. I actually started waking my dad up. My dad would be tired, and I would be still, 6-year-old me, full of energy, getting up out of bed 3 a.m. in the morning and going into my dad's room, and mum would be asleep, dad would be asleep, just rubbing on the shoulder, like, Dad, United's playing, come on, get up. And the same, obviously, with the Socceroos too, watching the national team, because same thing, they're overseas and the time zones. So, yeah, a lot of good memories, and we would just have all the lights in the house would be off, Champions League anthem playing, TV blaring. It was great as a kid. That's kind of what really spurred my passion for it.
So during school time and during the school curriculum, you would have gone to sleep, woken up at 3 until probably 4:30, then gone back to bed and woken up for a school day.
Exactly, yeah. And it was funny because
What?
my mum would be waking me up to get ready for school because I would just
Yeah,
be so tired.
yeah.
She's like, "You
Well,
got to go to school now." She'd come in, so I'd wake up my dad to watch football. Then my mum would wake me up for school. So,
I
yeah,
like the sound of that though. Kind of like having something in the middle of the night. You're kind of not really losing or gaining any hours because who cares about an extra hour and a half of 2 hours of sleep? You know, of course it's a decent amount if you look at it, but to watch a bit of football, it's nothing. And to watch it in the middle of the night must be really cool. And not to have anything to think about. Everyone's asleep. Just watching the football for 90 minutes straight must be an amazing feeling, without being interrupted and told to do other jobs and things like that. Uh,
yeah.
you spent days alone. Let's talk about this brick wall. So you were playing up against a brick wall with painted goalposts on it. Was this your first like introduction to football?
My first introduction to football was probably, well, after watching all the games with my dad. He would just take me to the park and we'd kick a ball around. So that was the first introduction, really, just kicking with my dad. But after a while, when I found the motivation to go kick on my own, that was the tool that helped me. That brick wall. It claimed a lot of my balls. A lot of my balls got ruined by that wall. I'm still bitter to this day, but I had a lot of good times. It was good. But yeah, my first introduction, yeah, it was pretty early on. But my dad was the one that would take me and go for a run with me.
We'll talk about the Jubilani ball in a moment because I'm sure you're still quite upset about it to this day.
Yeah.
But this brick wall though, because I mentioned that of course I think most children would expect to have maybe a goalpost with a net possibly. That's an extra addition to like today. But for you to have it up against a brick wall, is that to make your touches better? Is that to make everything in your technique better, or was the brick wall just there for the sake of it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know why it was there, to be honest, because there was this sandstone rock face with bushland above it, so it was a natural reserve, and there was just this kind of this smooth brick surface protruding from that. So I don't know what that was for, but what I do know is that at that reserve, football was played there in the winter. So football is a winter sport for us here, and um, yeah, there were goals at the reserve in the wintertime, but then in the summertime, cricket would be played there. So the goals would be taken out of the ground. So what I would assume was the reason for that brick wall was during the off season. They would paint a white outline of a goal because they didn't have the goals up on the pitch. So I couldn't use real goals. And very differently to the UK, at least where I grew up, there weren't any cages. Like street football wasn't really a thing. I'd play with my neighbors sometimes in the street, just free play, but there weren't cages, there weren't futsal courts. Like it was pretty much go down to the field down the road, and oftentimes there weren't any goals there because football really isn't the main sport here. So that brick wall was huge for me because that acted as the goal that I wish I had access to. So yeah, and it did help because I wouldn't have to go chasing it all the time. So that helped with repetitions too. So yeah.
I think England, and maybe you could talk about Australia about this side of the game. Everyone always tells me these professional footballers, street football is the thing that needs more help. I think that a lot of these players who have come through in the not 1900s, like late 1900s, early 2000s, they've all been quite adept to having street football and playing street football. I mean, it's only recently that I've gotten into five-a-side football, which has over time developed my left foot, which before was non-existent, and now trying to get me some skills, which again usually were non-existent. But it becomes quite natural. And I think if someone like myself was shown this at a relatively young age, maybe it'd be 4 or 5, I think you kind of grow up with a really good natural first touch, a really good natural skill advantage. And I think in the UK especially, we don't really have a lot of access to that. It's kind of just a lot of grass and a lot of fields and not really caged in. And I think the caged in part of the game makes you feel fearless as well because there's no getting out of it. You can't run away from a challenge. You're in the challenge. You're in the zone. You've got to go and play up to your best advantages. And of course, with the disadvantages, they should over time heal. For you, is that what it is like in Australia as well? Is there not really a lot of access to these pitches?
Yeah, I would say so. Especially in the urban central areas in Sydney, more of a concrete jungle really, and yeah, not much access to fields. But I was very grateful and lucky growing up that there were areas, yeah, where you could do things, and that's the thing. If you have a passion as a kid, you work out a way. You know what I mean? You play anywhere, and that's the amazing thing about football. You could just take your ball. You don't need a lot, and wherever there's a little bit of space to run around, even just at a park, even at a playground, where there was any room to kind of juggle or dribble or just run around, that was it for me. Like, that was enough. So, yeah.
Grassroots football for you is something that you've represented, and you also represented the school at their level. Talk to me. What do you think was better? What do you think was worth more your time? What did you get more game time in? What one did you enjoy more?
Oof, that's a tough one. Because my grassroots kind of evolved a bit. So I would say from the ages of 6 to 12, I'd say 10 to 12 grassroots, and then after that high school, because high school is kind of that transition between grassroots and men's football. So in terms of the environment and the school I was at, the team that we had, the football system we had at the school, it was a really good taste into senior football, and we're training a few days a week, which at the time for a kid was more than enough. And we had good coaches. We had a man called Gwyn Berry, who's from the UK, and Gwyn was amazing, and he just even pushed my love for football further during my time at high school. So he was the technical director at the school. So having access to mentors and coaches like him was just incredible, and he would do skill sessions and stuff like that. So in terms of improving as a player and taking it more seriously, definitely high school, but grassroots was fun too, playing with my friends, those early memories. And obviously the AC Milan Academy in my final year of grassroots before high school. Yeah, it wasn't the AC Milan Academy, but with academies, how they have kind of these international, residencies or schools.
Yeah.
And then we had one for AC in Sydney. So it was great. They smashed us the first time, and then we met them in the grand final that season, beat them 3-0. So that was a good way to return the favor. But they were crazy. Like, we were 13. Some of us were turning 13. And these kids are 10, 11. They were actually playing up in age. They weren't even in our division. But yeah, they were good. But it was good to get even with them. But I would say high school for sure, if I had to choose.
Yeah. I think in the UK, and I think a lot of people have this experience. So for me, right, and obviously this is on the podcast that I've done, and it will be out this week. I started playing football at the age of about 9 or 10, right? So it's not been long, okay? And I never had aspirations to go professional. I think everyone would like to go professional, but I'm quite realistic and know that although I hit the back of the net quite frequently, I don't think it's going to happen. Now, for me, because obviously I mentioned that I used to live in the city, right? So now I've come out to the countryside. I joined a team, and that was about 4 years ago, possibly. And ever since then, I think that grassroots football has done me well. It's good exercise again. I've been top scorer every year. And I've always kind of jumped up division. So I started in division 7, 6, 4, 2, and 1. Right, and I've always been the top scorer, which is something I cherish because it's been with the same 3 clubs or 3 teams. And I think for myself, I think there was certainly one of those teams with one of those coaches that really hindered my growth, if you like, or really hindered game time where, there was a bit of murmurs that he thinks he's Pep Guardiola, where he was playing people who are meant to be strikers at left back and me who's a striker at centre back. And of course, people are willing to play wherever because you are the coach. However, I think he was kind of doing it to kind of take the mick a bit, to be honest. And again, it's hindering development. It's hindering... I think it was annoying people. But then you go to the school side of the game. And again, I was lucky enough to make 3 or 4 games appearances for the school when they were in one of the years. But again, it was kind of like favoritism. And it's kind of like, I get that everyone has favorites, right? No one can tell me that they don't, because everyone does. But I think for these players, because we're going to talk about the gap between professionals in the second division and the first division in Australian football later on. It was literally like some of these people were playing in academies and some of these people were playing in the lowest of the lows, and you don't understand how they could even be in the team. But they were in the team, in this high school team, because of the coach and because the teacher liked these guys better because they were all mates. And for me, it made me a bit optimistic. It makes me a bit, is it really worth my time? One of the games we got driven an hour. Bearing in mind, I was playing all the games up until then, the 2 or 3 games that I played prior, 90 minutes, or the majority of the 90 minutes, actually. I didn't play all of the 90 minutes. And we drove an hour for myself to play 15 minutes. I mean, really? Because there is limitations where a lot of the players, or every player, has to play at least half the game. And I was expecting to come on at half time, and I was thinking, because I've been this striker in this team now for the last year, like, what's going on? And yeah, it was just like all of a sudden it changed, and and whatever they started to lose, and whatever it was. And of course, it's different, but it's frustrating because I think grassroots level, the idea of it sounds amazing, but it obviously depends on what coach you have. And in the UK, we have coaches which are players' dads and mums, majority of dads. And for me, it's really disappointing to see that grassroots has a lot of potential, and it still does. It's fulfilling the potential, but there's also a bit of a side where, how's that guy playing? Why is he in this team? And I think that is negative. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, do you agree? Is that what it's like in Australia? I'm sorry for the rambling on.
Oh, no, not at all. I couldn't agree more, mate. I think you hit the nail on the head. Favoritism is one of the things I hate most about this amazing sport, and it is such a shame. But what I've learned in the last couple of years, especially, is you got to control what you can control. Like, simple as that. And a lot of the time, you can't control who gets in the team. You can only control your work on the pitch, your work off the pitch, and if it's not working out for you, just leave. Like, I've been in non-league for a couple of seasons now, and that's what happened last season. That's exactly what happened. I was doing really well, starting in first grade, 3 assists in 2 games. The next game, I got dropped out of the squad, and I hardly played for the rest of the season. No reason why. I asked the coach. I was very professional about it, giving reasons, but he had his favorites, and that was it. And as soon as that season ended, I was like, whoosh, I was just out the door. And it's tough, even in the A-League, even in our top level. I'm not gonna mention names. Some of you guys watching this might know the club, but there's a coach, and both his sons play for that team, and it's my first experience. And I've played with players, even at non-league, who can play top league in Australia. It's crazy, and I'm playing with them, and I'm like, dude, why aren't you playing pro? And some of them don't want to go that far, and that's fair enough. But some of them simply don't have the exposure or the connections. And that was the huge lesson I've learned about football, especially taking it seriously. Is it's not just about how good you are and about what you know. It's about who you know. And the first kind of experience I had of favoritism was in high school. Actually, when I was age 12, leaving primary school and going into high school football, they said you either choose to play for your school or you choose to continue playing for grassroots club. You can't play for both. They actually said that to me, so I had to choose. I chose to represent the school because I wanted to. And what happened was my particular school had 2 preparatory schools. So I was at another primary school outside, but there were some kids who had gone to that same school from kindergarten to grade 6 and then into the high school campus. And those teams, there weren't even any trials the first season. The first 2 grades, first team and second team, were taken by the kids who went to the prep schools. The rest of us that came from outside of the system, we just filled up the lower teams. So I actually started in high school. I started in the bottom team, and I worked my way up. And eventually, in the final year of high school, I got to the second team, which was good. But that was kind of an early introduction. Age 12, I was starting to see a little bit, I guess you could say, injustice, kind of kids that are really passionate about the sport, who are hard workers, but for one reason or another, they don't get the opportunities. So I completely resonate with what you're saying. And it's, I think it's a huge problem here in Australia. There's a lot of talent that slips through the cracks because of this.
I think every player, if you have a team of 22 or whatever it may be, 20, in our case, it was about 17 or 18. We had this idea where, and this is going to sound ludicrous, right? But everyone knows about it, so I may as well say it. I've said it before, so I don't really mind. So we had this team, right? 17, let's say 17 players. I can't hit the nail on the head with the exact amount. And we were getting told by the coach, too many players, right? First season this was too many players. We're going to have a rotation where every player voluntarily has to miss a few games a season. Second season, 2 players leave, 3 players come in. So now we've got 18 players, and I'm thinking, what's been going on last season when everyone's been telling me that we've got too many players and we're going to have to start a rotational system? So we were winning, right? We started the season off maybe 2 losses, right? First 2 games. The next few games, it was probably about 6 unbeaten. And we were like, okay, this is good. We lost the 7th game. And then there was a big argument, like we were getting shouted at, etc. Now we're going to have to go back to the rotation system because that's apparently the reason why we lost. And, again, it's not anything about favourites or anything like that, but people, because this is grassroots, everyone's paying their money to play. Everyone was paying their money to play, and everyone had to miss out on games a season. But there was also things where and this season it's the same thing. 2 people have left, me being one of them. They've now got 3 players in. Where's the logic? I don't know. Where is the logic? And there was also a thing where if you're late, which I completely understand, you don't start, right? If you're late to training, if you're late to the game day, you don't start. But it got to a point where the coach was late, but his son still played. And and if we're going to keep it like that, everything should be fair. And even if you're a millisecond late, 1 minute late, 2 minutes late, it's a deal, because if you set a standard, those standards have got to be met, right? Regardless of whether people like them or not. But then for the coach himself to go and break it, but his son still gets to play when they were long, 6 or 7 minutes late, it's ludicrous. But that is the same. I don't even know what the word is. That's the same normal experience that everyone has in non-league. Someone experiences a coach where they're not helping them, they're hindering them. And, I took the decision to leave. And I think everyone knows that by now. I've said it in the podcast. And like you said, I did it in the most professional way I could. But the professionalism that I had was met with the most immature ideas and words coming out of people's mouth. And for me, it was a decision to leave. It was toxic. It was everything that it didn't want to be. And of course, for me, I've been captain in the teams. I've been a leader. But again, it was hindering a development where it didn't need to be hindered. I didn't need to be playing at centre back. I didn't need to be playing left wing. I didn't need to be starting on the bench. But, I'm not the kind of guy to go and say that to the coach. I did. And then, anyway, I've left. So enough talking about me once again. But I think it's quite good to balance his experiences, considering that you've spent a lot of time in non-league and in grassroots level. So it's quite a similar level, I suppose. You're represented at the school, grassroots, but you were hungry to prove people wrong. And a coach turned around to you and said, you're just a 3rd grade player. What does that mean? Tell the people, because obviously 3rd grade is American words, it's not English. So what would 3rd grade be in English?
Yeah, so I guess you could say, so if you look at non-league, you usually have 1st grade and then under 23s, I think, in the UK. Correct me if I'm wrong. But you typically have a 1st grade men's team and then, your reserve or your underneath 23s. Yeah, exactly. So this coach was telling me I'm not even in those 2. I'm in the team outside of that. And the way this came about was, and he was a great coach. Kerry Lambos, his name is. He helped me so much through high school, and he was consistently putting in good words to the coaches above, to the technical director, saying, promote this kid, play him in the higher teams. And I was really grateful to him. And he taught me a lot about football, like just because he played at a high level in Sydney. I think he played for St. George, or one of the Greek ethnic clubs. But Greek guy as well. So loves his football, and he helped me so much as a high school kid. But anyway, back to the point. It got to a point where I was in the 3rd team, and I really just wanted to, I'm just trying to improve as much as possible. So I had the conversation with him, like, what do I need to do to get into the 1st team? Because similar to what you just said, Jamie, I'm watching the 1st grade games. There's kids in there that I could at least come off the bench for, if not replace them starting wise. And I'm like, I think I can play this level. I'm watching it. I'm thinking, man, I work just as hard as I'm in training. I love my football. This is a good level. I'd like to challenge myself here. So I asked Kerry, I'm like, what do I need to do to get into this team? And he just turned around and said, look, I like you. You're a good player, but you're just a 3rd grade player. And that was just, I felt my heart just shatter into pieces. As a kid hearing that, I was like, wow, okay. After all he did for me, that was hard to hear. And that really kind of kicked off. I always, as a kid, I always wanted to make it pro, but that really kind of motivated me at that point. Now I don't really do it. I do it more for myself now. I don't really care about others and what they say and proving people wrong. That's not really about it anymore. But as a 16-year-old kid at the time, I had an ego, and I wanted to prove everyone wrong, and that was the one phrase that did it for me. I was like, right, I'm going to work my butt off and get into this team. And I ended up getting into 2nd team. So I did prove him wrong to an extent. I got into the 2nd grade, which is good. But after high school, that kicked me on the journey.
And obviously, I think for some people, being told that would definitely hinder them. It would definitely, for some, it could even make them drop out of the game. And of course, no one wants to see that. No one wants to hear about those kind of stories. But I think that is where, and you've mentioned in Australia, I think this definitely happens in the UK as well. And I mentioned academies as well, especially top-level academies, can just dispose of players so willingly, so easily, so without any care, ignorance, if you like. Let's move on, because, we need to talk about your whole career. And it's really interesting, the insights that I'm sure you're going to provide us as we go along. But just mention to us about the Jubilani ball, because I'm sure everyone wants to hear it.
Man, that ball was crazy. So obviously, 2010 World Cup ball. I'd saved up a little bit of pocket money, and I went to Rebel Sport, which is like kind of like the JD in the UK. It's a pretty big sports brand here, and they had the actual match balls, Jabulani. So they have the cheap knockoff ones and the beginner training models and stuff like that. But this one had the grooves, it had the divots and all that. So it was like $180 Australian, which was a lot at the time.
Which is crazy for a football anyway.
Exactly right. But for a 10-year-old Geo at the time, that was a lot of pocket money saved up. So I've got out and splurged and got this ball, and oh my days, like the lightness just hitting the ball. And this is 10-year-old me. Like, I'm not striking it with any sort of venom, but it's the movement, how that ball was allowed to be in the World Cup, I don't understand. Like, the movement on this ball was absolutely nuts. But there was one session where me and my mate were just training together, not even training, just kicking it around because I wanted to show him this ball. And I was like, dude, let's go for a kick. We're taking the Jabulani. We're going to hit some top bins, knuckle shots. Like, we're doing it. And we were just playing a little bit of a two-touch game where we kick it up as high as we can in the air and try and bring it down. And obviously with the Jabulani, that was tough because it would just move in the wind. But great idea from us two. We decided to do this drill underneath a massive tree, and it's come to my mate's turn. He's just booted up the ball as high as he could to try and control it. And it's just got stuck in like one of the nooks between the branches, right at the top of the tree. Not even on a low branch. It's right at the top of the tree. And I'm just like, oh no, how are we gonna get that? And he's just like, oh, I'm sorry. And I'm like, yeah, you better be. Like, it cost me a lot of money. So anyway, we tried for like 2 hours at least to try and knock this ball. We were throwing things up there. We were throwing our boots up there. We were throwing rocks up there. We were throwing whatever we could get up there to try and get this ball down. It just wouldn't move. And I ended up, the sun went down. We lost light. So I just went home, came back the next day, gone from the tree. So that was it. That was it for the Jabulani, unfortunately. But some good memories of that ball. That was a crazy ball.
I would be the same as you. I think I'd be the same as you today. But I don't think I'd spend that much money on a football. And even if I got it stuck in a trunk, doing everything in my power to get that ball back, I'm not leaving until it goes dark because I'm not letting 140 Australian dollars or however much it would be in the UK dispose out of me like that. It just would never happen. So the early signs that you had, it's true, Gio. I'm being serious. I don't want to spend my money on football that expensive anyway. Early signs for you. Yeah. You played for North Sydney in the under-12s win versus AC Milan. You lost the first time. The first time that you played them, and I'm sure being in under-12, I'm sure you would have had the idea, I'm sure players would have had this experience and idea in their mind that you can go ahead and beat them here. I think the first game would have been a shock to you. I think a lot of people would have gone out there thinking that they can go and win.
Yeah, absolutely. And we just had the physical advantage, and we knew that going into the second game. Like when we met them in the grand final, we were 13, they're 11. We had a couple of big boys on our team, and we just said, right, we know these guys are technical. We can play as well, but we know they're going to play quick, so just don't give them time. And we just went out there and we bully them and try and get in their face, try and get in their head, and it eventually, it worked out. Like they couldn't get in the groove. But that first game was a shock. They were better than any team in our comp. Way better, heads and shoulders above. And they were 2 years younger. It was crazy. And they were just knocking it around. You'd go to try and tackle them and press, and the ball would already be gone from their foot. So they were very good. I wonder if any of them actually went overseas to Italy or made it even further. It'd be interesting. I haven't heard of any of them since then or kept in touch. I don't know, but it's always interesting with those academies to see if anyone goes further,
Well, I think I was about to say, so a lot of these academies work out in China, a lot of them work out in Jamaica, and these regions where maybe the experience and the exposure of players isn't as great as what it can be in Europe. Possibly that's why they're in Australia, because as you'll go on to mention later, the exposure there for players isn't world class. It's not like England, not like Spain, not like Germany. But I think the same thing as you, where I wonder what the usage of these players are, because it's not actually the AC Milan academy. It's kind of like a franchise AC Milan going out there. So I wonder what the idea behind all of this is. If there is a good player that maybe they can go ahead and take to Italy and then sell him on for a big fee, I don't know, but what's the chances in that? So low, right? And for you, you obviously, this is a big time for you, and it's early signs in your career, because you met João Pereira, who used to play for FC Basel, and Dan Javoski, who obviously was a former Champions League player, and he mentored you. Who was more important in your journey?
Oof. That's a really tough one. I would say more important in my journey, I'd say Dan Georgieski was. But Juan was the first person who I felt believed in me, apart from my dad. He was the first kind of external figure that I had. And that's when I met him out of high school. That's when I started getting into one-on-one training and trying to work with a coach. I realized up until that point, I'd pretty much been training on my own. And I realized if I'm going to take this seriously, I need someone who's been there and done that. So Juan really helped me take it to the next level. But Dan, just with the experience that Dan's had, he's taught me things and given me insights from the pro level that Juan hadn't. But Juan had that belief in me, and that was really important as a kid, especially coming out of high school. So yeah, I would say overall, at the moment, Dan, he offered me more, but Juan was a really important figure for me. Yeah.
And this was at what age? 12, 13?
So when I met Juan?
And of course, Dan.
Yeah, so I met Juan at 18. So I had actually come out of high school. I had finished my final year, finished up with my exams, and I met Juan one afternoon just training alone at the pitch. And then Dan I met after COVID. So that was a few years later along my journey. Yeah.
I think with a lot of people, and it's kind of similar to me in the media world, where I'm starting, poor English. I'm starting to get into this a lot more and trying to get some really cool people on, as yourself, Jay. So again, appreciate you coming onto the show. Now, I think people don't really understand, people like myself and obviously people like you back then, how willing people actually are to help people out and try and help them, mentor them, as Dan did for you. And I think a lot of people struggle to realize that the world isn't as cruel as what people try and make out. I think at times, I think a lot of people would help you, and I think some people might then say, it's a bit too much of an ask, and it wants some money, but I think a lot of people are certainly willing to help, and because it gives them something to do, of course, and it also would be a great achievement if someone like Gio was to go professionally, and we're going to talk about that later on. So these guys for you were a huge aspirations, but these kind of came later on in your career. But let's talk about the concept of identity in football before we go ahead and talk about the rest of your journey, because you've come from an ethnic following, and you've said a lot of teams like in Serbia, Australia, Greece, Italy, a lot of riots took place in Australia because a lot of clubs were backed by these ethnic groups. Now, the federation cracked down on the groups, and you think that's why football died in Australia. So, as we know, football in Australia isn't the biggest of sports. A lot of players in Australia, it's probably, I think, 4 to 6 players in the Premier League who are Australian. There's not a big amount. Australia's a major country with major funding, you would have thought, but obviously we find that is not the case. So what happened in the concept of identity? Talk to us about all these ethnic followings.
Yeah, I mean, this is just my personal opinion. Everyone has different things to say about this. I still believe, on the funding note, Jamie, I will say, I still believe football is backed quite a lot here. Just not to the extent of other sports like Aussie rules or cricket. But especially in New South Wales and Victoria, the main national states at the semi-professional level, there's a lot of money and a lot of investment in those districts for sure. But what I will say about the ethnic groups is, like with people like myself, families with generations coming from overseas, Australia is a very multicultural place, much like the UK, I guess. And you might want to back me up with that, but yeah, Australia, sure. I find was at the time growing up was very ethnic, and that helped the football scene because there were a lot of, as you said, a lot of clubs associated themselves with these ethnic groups: Macedonian clubs, Croatian clubs, Sydney United 58, which is one of the main historical clubs in Sydney, used to be called Sydney Croatia. But when they cracked down on the ethnic groups, they got rid of that. And now they're Sydney United, but they still have the red, white, and blue colors and the kind of resemblance of the flag and in the badge and stuff like that. But yeah, it was huge. I think obviously with countries in Europe and the Balkans, there's tensions there, so it would fights would often break out at games and stuff like that. And yeah, I never am a fan of violence, but football was a reason why so many people of these backgrounds came together. It was a huge event, like the local derby, the local Sydney Olympic versus Sydney Croatia game, Greek versus Croatians, the local game on a Friday, Saturday night, which at the time was the National Soccer League. That was the first tier in Australia before the A-League. That game, those rivalries between ethnic groups were huge. Families would go, the games would draw big crowds, lots of revenue. And I think, yeah, once they crack, it's a shame about the violence because a few people that were irresponsible ruined the experience for the vast majority. And that's just the unfortunate reality of it. I would say another reason why it's kind of stagnated a bit in Australia is you touched on it before with the funding. The salary cap, I think, was a big issue. This is just my personal experience. 14 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, we would be able to bring in marquee signings to the A-League, pay him big amounts of money. Alessandro Del Piero, when he retired, he came to Sydney FC, and that was like a huge name. We could pull these big names to Australia who really just wanted to come for the money, but we could offer these big pay packages and get names down here that would pull in crowds and increase the love for our game and encourage more kids to join and play football. Much like how the MLS is now, bringing in Messi, Alba, Suarez, Busquets, all these big names. They've kind of kept going with that in Australia. Once they brought in the salary cap, obviously we couldn't lure any big names to Australia. So it's kind of a shame how that went. But I think those two combined has led to a bit of a stagnation in football here at the top level. But the ethnic groups was a big part because, yeah, we're still very multicultural today, and the groups are still there at the games, but not to the extent, just simply because of the policing.
That's really interesting that you mentioned about the salary cap. And I think the salary cap for me is a weird one because people talk about it in the Premier League with FPL, where clubs can only spend as much as they earn or something along those lines. It's all very confusing. And now I feel as if I understand where they're coming from. However, if a consortium was to take over Leicester City, for example, why would it? And if I wanted to spend £100 million on 3 new players, why? Why can't I? Why can't I go ahead and spend that when my revenue is only 30 million? If I feel like it's acceptable for me to spend that money, then surely I could spend that money, get a few big names in, boost up shirt sales, boost up attendances. And I kind of don't understand the reason of financial fair play. And the same thing with Australia. Now, I was going to compare it to Saudi Arabia, where Australia could go ahead and do a very similar thing. However, you'd probably want to base it more off America with Messi and those kind of things because it's not as intense as what Saudi are trying to do. There needs to be a clever infrastructure behind the football, which America's starting to have. And I think for Australia, you know, the promotion and relegations where no one can get promoted or relegated, is that a matter of time before that goes? Because I think it surely is.
Yeah, I think so. Next season, they're introducing the national second tier. So right now, I'm playing in the national Premier Leagues, which there's a national Premier League in every state around Australia, and they combine to form the unofficial second division in Australia. So I'm playing second division, but really next season it's going to be third division with this introduction of the official national second tier. And I could be wrong, but I believe there's going to be promotion relegation, or they're at least talking about it. So yeah, I think it is a matter of time, and it had to happen for sure.
It definitely has to happen, and I think it'll be a shock to those first few clubs that are relegated and are promoted because it's never been seen in Australian football in the recent years. In 2018 to 2021, though, you were still looking for clubs, right? You've never had the professional contract that you want to have, but we're going to talk about it in a moment where you've been very close to signing these professional deals, and you've trained very hard to go professionally, as we've spoken about. You went on many trials and had many challenges along the way. And that was in 2018 to 2021. Do you think that was hindered by COVID? Do you think that was stopping your progression to be able to sign that professional deal earlier?
Yeah, I think so. I think with COVID, seasons got cancelled. A lot of us, we were mid-season, and once the lockdown happened, the federation just called it off. So really it was up to me to, back to the drawing board, just keep training on your own, stuff like that. I think what was more important for me was the lack of connections, because throughout my high school years, I didn't play in an academy, didn't represent my state, wasn't at youth international level. So all of a sudden, I'm coming out of high school playing first grade men's with zero academy or first team experience. So no one I'm reaching out to wants to take a chance, which from a business perspective, I completely understand, because as you touched on it before, players are disposable. We're just really, in this industry, we're just assets, and clubs are businesses. And if I'm essentially an unproven, untested asset trying to get into the pro game. So I think that hindered me more. COVID was kind of, COVID was a hurdle, but there were problems before that, for sure.
I spoke to Elliot Duggan, who's played in the Conference League, played over in Cyprus and many other countries. Now, in lockdown in COVID, he had to be a postman to make things by. He was still a professional player before then, but during COVID, he wasn't. And it was a really interesting story to hear about it from him. However, he used LinkedIn twice to get him moves, and these were professional contracts. I think he spent, as you've done, over 100 messages to clubs, reaching out to them on LinkedIn. 2 of them got back to him. And over these 4 years that he was in professional football in Cyprus, he managed to get 2 professional deals. So it was amazing for him to hear this story that LinkedIn can really be a really good asset, regardless of Australia, whether you're in South Korea, whether you're in England, or wherever it may be. And you did something very similar. You reached out to 100 plus clubs. 2 got back to you, 1 from Queensland and 1 from South Australia. But what happened there? Because you had no luck in signing the deal.
Yeah. Pretty much. I just want to, before touching on that, I just want to say LinkedIn, I wish I found that sooner, honestly. In this digital social age where every single contact is at the touch of a fingertip, and for someone like myself where connections and contacts were lacking and so important to furthering my career, I wish I found it sooner. And the last couple of years, I'm very grateful for the opportunities that came about because of this platform. So I think when used in the right way, it can be really beneficial, especially for players who may be watching this, like myself, who don't have connections and who struggle to find connections. Get yourself marketing on LinkedIn. I think it's a really good thing to do. Put your clips up, put your CV up, start reaching out. But so what happened with Queensland was funny, because they said, come up to trial, and I went up to trial, but then they said, oh, this is actually the under 23s trial. We didn't know you were above the age. So I was 23 at the time, so I had just missed the cutoff, and they pretty much said you got to be born before this certain day to be able to trial. So they obviously invited me up assuming that I was under 23s. So that was kind of, they didn't really do their homework with my CV efficiently enough, because I went up thinking it was a first grade trial, and then they said, yes, this is under 23s, you're not eligible. And I said, well, I've flown up all this way. Can I trial anyway? And it was actually really good. It went well, and I got a connection out of that. The video analyst who watched the trial said, look, we can't sign you obviously because you're over age, but I'm happy to be a reference for you. So that was really good. That I got something out of that. And then South Australia at a team. So that was at Gold Coast Knights, who are a really prominent team in NPL Queensland. So they're Croatian as well, Croatian ethnic background. So good ethnic club, good history. South Australia was good. That was at a team called Modbury Jets. And I connected with the coach, Maurice Natale, who's a professional. I think they're coming first right now in the league. They're doing really well this year. But went for a trial with Modbury, and essentially that was just an ability. That was an ability thing. I trialed with them for a couple of weeks, and they said, yeah, we think you're good, but you're not better than what we have. And that's just the harsh reality of trying to get to that level, especially if you're a player from overseas or a player from interstate. You got to be better than what they already have that's local. Especially, and I found that out going to America too, because they only have limited spots. So if you're taking up a limited spot, you got to be better than what's already in their squad. And they had this kid from the Adelaide United Academy, the A-League Academy, ex-A-League Academy, and he was playing the same position as me, box-to-box mid, and he was great. He was a great player, and there was no way I was going to bench him in the coach's eyes, and that's fair enough. So that didn't work out there. But they were the first 2 experiences where it was kind of close but no cigar, and I kind of started getting some hope there.
We haven't got too long left, so we're going to talk about the time that you signed then after this for second tier side Newcastle in Newcastle, not Newcastle in the UK, Newcastle in Australia. We have a lot of cities and villages and towns in England that are named over in Australia as well. There was a negative coach and you had huge losses in the team, but it also helped you with mental training and building yourself personality.
100%. This was the breakthrough year for me, honestly. Now that hindsight is so powerful, Jamie, because you at the moment, at the time, it just feels like it's the worst thing. And that was the season we're talking about before, where I got benched for no reason. The coach wouldn't explain why, and it was a really rough season, and I wasn't getting game time. I was promised that the team was going to be built around me. I impressed at trials. I signed the deal, and this was my first full semi-professional season at the NPL level in Australia, and would have been a good chance for me to actually get some experience under my belt, and it didn't work out the way I envisioned. But looking back, it was amazing because this was the first year that I really realized that football is so mental. It is such a mental game, and that's the first year I really started taking the mental side of the sport seriously. I worked with a psychologist, Gabriel Dino from Brazil. He works with Jeremy Doku, I think, at the moment. So he's a very good sports psychologist and very good at what he does. And I realized there's a missing ingredient, and I need to deal with all these challenges at the club. So I'm really grateful to Newcastle because it taught me so much, and it taught me to not only work on the ability and work on the on-field stuff and the fitness, but also the mind. And the mind is so powerful, and every player at the top level has mastered it.
Well, it's like the name of the podcast, isn't it? Inside the mind of it. It goes into players' minds and hear what they've got to say. In 2024 to present day, so in late 2023, you packed to trial over not in Australia, in America. After several rejections, things happened out of your control, travel issues, visa complications, no financial help. And obviously, it helped build you once again. It was a really good opportunity, I think, for you. You almost signed over in America, didn't quite get the chance, and you missed a deadline in Australia, and you've been playing non-league to keep fit. A team from Tasmania were interested. And what have you got to tell us about the late 2023 saga?
Yeah, so once again, that came across through LinkedIn. So I reached over, as you touched upon before, Jamie, I reached over 100 clubs in Australia from every state. I wasn't getting any luck in Sydney, so I thought to reach interstate. I had a whole Microsoft Excel spreadsheet of clubs and statuses and coach contacts, and out of 120 something clubs, only 3-4 got back. So I thought, look, I'm not getting any luck in Australia. I'm just going to roll the dice, see what I can do overseas. And again, thanks to LinkedIn, had some agents in America who liked my videos and said, hey, we got trials coming up over the new year. You want to come up? And that's it. I had some money saved up from high school and from work, and I just packed my bag and got on a one-way ticket there pretty much. And a lot of challenges. I think everyone in their life should travel at least once if they haven't already. Living in another country teaches you so much about yourself, about the game, about the way different people in different countries live compared to in Australia. So it was very good. But it was hard. That it almost broke me. I almost gave up football, to be honest.
And obviously, scouting in Australia is quite hard to come by. Low league level is almost non-existent. There's a low level of scouting. It's hard to find agents without having yourself being a high experienced player in the top divisions, for example. And it's hard to connect, but I suppose LinkedIn helps with that. Are you seeing that there is something coming through, a bit of a breakthrough where scouting is becoming a lot more prominent, a lot better to see, and a lot more frequent?
Yeah, definitely. I think, especially at the NPL level, a lot of games are video broadcast. So I think that's really important. Again, we live in a digital time, and not every state broadcasts their games, but certainly the main ones, Sydney, Melbourne, where I'm playing in Tasmania, the games are on YouTube. So anyone can watch these games, and it provides a really good platform for players looking to showcase themselves. So I would say definitely, but outside of NPL, going to lower non-league levels, still very much hard for players to break through. And I've played with players at the all-age grassroots level, just local league, and they're very, very good and deserve to play higher. They just don't have the means. So it's getting there, but there's still work to be done. And I would say maybe you can offer more insight into the UK, but I would say there's not as deep of a scouting network, especially at the lower levels.
We'll talk about that in a moment. What club are you playing for over in Tasmania? Because Alex Tatnell, who I interviewed, one of the first people I had on, I think it was like Clement Zebras. Is that the name of the team that you recognise, or have you heard about them?
Yeah, we actually just played them yesterday, the day before yesterday. So, yeah, Clarence Zebras. So Clarence are a Hobart team who are South Tasmania. I'm playing for Launceston United, so they're a team in the north. So, yeah, really good. It's been a really tough experience, tough season. I came mid-season. Team was struggling. We got 2 guys from the UK as well mid-season. They've really helped us, and we recorded our first win for the season against Clarence on the weekend. So it was good. So that's interesting. That small world. Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, it is a small world, and of course, well done for the win. You mentioned about scouting in the UK, and I think they do it brilliantly over here. I think imagine it like a tree. The top of the tree is the Premier League, and as you go down, you see all the vines all tangled up and knotted up. And small world, it is the small world where they're all getting knotted up. And these agents know this player who's had that agent in the past. And I think in the lower leagues in the UK, they do it really well. Even if they are semi-pro, you still have agents. And I think that is something that is probably being missed over in Australia. And possibly it's because of lack of interest in agents, that agents aren't really too interested over in Australia. There's not really enough publicity for players like yourself. Of course, we spoke about inconsistent infrastructure and facilities, and some clubs have really unfair sponsors and financial aspects which can help them. Of course, you mentioned to me that the divide in quality is so big. The top of the league in Australia in the semi-pro second tier can quite happily play in the top tier. The bottom is a bunch of amateur players that probably shouldn't be playing in the second tier. There is a big gap, and you could go ahead and talk to us about that in a moment. But there's also high fees for NPL youth players, and there's insufficient funding for popularity in the youth players. So what have you got to say about those topics where Australian football is kind of stabbing itself in the back?
Yeah, absolutely. I think touching upon the quality gap in NPL, across NPL, just giving you a real life example, in the Australia Cup, which is our equivalent of your FA Cup, we've had, I think, 2 or 3 A-League teams this season have been knocked out by NPL teams. So, yeah, just kind of reinforcing what you said, the top NPL teams, especially those from Victoria and New South Wales, can very, very easily play in the top league, I think. They just need the backing, really, and the financial backing to get players that can play at the top level to add to their squad. Yeah, in terms of what was the other aspect, sorry, to your question?
You mentioned about high fees for NPL youth players to be able to obviously pay to play. Is that how it works in Australia?
That's right, yeah. So for the youth development programs, a lot of kids that want to end up in the NPL first team, they pay exorbitant amounts of money to enter the youth pathway. And a lot of these fees go straight to the federation. So that leaves, obviously, you would, in an ideal situation, most of that money would go to the club. That way the club can actually pay for better players, sign better players, work on their ground, maybe construct a new stand. But at least in my personal experience, what I've seen, and this is personal too, when I register for teams, a lot of the money, it shows you the breakdown, and most of it is just going to the footballing body. So many clubs don't see a lot of the money that kids pay for to go into these pathways. So yeah, there's a little bit of, I would like to see better allocation of resources across the game here.
You know, I think, Joe, it's really interesting because I spoke to Alex Tatnell before. I've spoken to a few other people doing podcasts over in Australia, really great people, and I've got a lot of respect for them. And they've always mentioned about the promotions and relegations, and I think that is something that, from a foreigner's point of view, from someone who watches it from afar, it is really interesting to see that there is a lack of infrastructure. The promotions and relegations thing's never going to stop baffling me. And obviously, the Women's World Cup was over in Australia, and there was debates as to whether they'd be able to host the World Cup in 2038. It was a long time in the future, and they were just like, it's not capable, it's not possible. Your stadiums in the Women's World Cup were like 18,000, and they were your 4th or 5th biggest stadiums. And of course, that's a big deal. 18,000 people is not a lot of people to have in a stadium for a World Cup, a Men's World Cup, with how many teams it's going to be? It's going to be like triple the amount of teams as to what we usually experience. Now, I think, Joe, this upcoming summer, obviously the seasons are different in Australia. But when you finish with your time in Tasmania, I'm sure you're going to be looking for the professional contract. Are you going to look over back in America? Are you going to go back into trials in America? Or are you going to look for Australia as first division?
Yeah, I mean, football is a crazy game, as you know, and things can change overnight. So really, I've learned to just not attach myself to any outcome. I'm focused on fulfilling my contract with this current team, and I don't really know. I don't really have a plan of what's going to happen. I'm focused on playing as best as I can. I'm helping the team as best as I can, and the rest will take care of itself. I really did love America. I just couldn't get a visa. I would love to explore that avenue again for sure. But I'm also open to, obviously, that's a difficult opportunity because I'm taking up a limited roster spot. So here in Australia, I'm a passport holder. Ideally, it would be great to look at something here. So for me right now, it's just about getting that consistency, that game time that I haven't been getting the last few seasons, and working on my game, becoming a better player. I'm still 24. I know I've got minutes left in the tank. And then it's no rush. I love the process. Whatever happens, happens. If it's meant to be, it will work out.
Of course, and I look forward to watching you on your journey. Now, last but not least, I think we've spoken about everything in your career up to this point, playing in the park, playing with the Jabulani ball, which obviously got put up a tree. And now let's talk about your FIFA card rating, which is something we always do on this channel now. I think it's going to become quite a good thing that everyone kind of enjoys. And I spoke to a Wolverhampton Wanderers legend I think he was 73 years old, and he was like, "What's a FIFA card?" So I had to explain it to him, and it was very interesting. That's going to be coming out soon for those people. Now, let's begin with your pace. What would your pace be on EAFC?
I'd say, man, I've slowed down a bit, but I was quite pacey a few seasons ago. I'd say 80. 80's fair.
And you've got to give a reason behind all of your ratings. So why would 80 be the fair pace for you now?
I'm not a super explosive player, and I don't have a fast top speed, but I'm quick over 5-10 yards. So I would say in the EAFC detailed stats, my sprint speed wouldn't be so high, but my acceleration might be a bit higher than the sprint speed. So yeah, I would say 80's fair. High 70s probably.
A lot of people tell me that my acceleration is awful, so I need to work on the acceleration. I think my top speed, but my top speed's good. I think it's just getting to that top speed takes me a bit of time. As a midfielder, and I always mention this to people, you might be a more defensive midfielder. You won't need this stat as much. You might be a more attacking midfielder. You would need the stat more. Shooting, what would that be?
Man, it's weird because I can score a good one, but I can shank one as well. I got a good shank in me. So honestly, I'd say a bit less than the pace. I'd probably give myself a 70. Yeah.
I mean, that's fair for a midfielder. No midfielder. I think Kevin De Bruyne's is about 80, so you're not too far off KDB, so you're getting there.
That's decent.
Passing.
That's not bad, yeah.
As a midfielder, KDB's passing is up there as well. What would your passing be?
Yeah, I think passing is one of my strengths. I'd probably give 85 for that.
Again, dribbling. Would you need dribbling in most scenarios? Probably, but also probably not at the same time.
Yeah, I only dribble really in tight spaces and try and keep the ball close to me. So I'm definitely not a tricky winger. I'm not a Doku or I'm definitely not a Messi. Like Messi is my idol and his dribbling is out of this world. But yeah, I don't really have a lot of tricks in my locker. Very simple player. I prefer to just get the ball and move it on. But my first touch is okay. So I would say probably for dribbling 70, 75.
Let's do 75. Let's boost your card rating up a tiny bit more. Defending, what would that be?
Oh, mate, defending, I'm shocking. 30.
30? Really?
I'm terrible at defend. My coach last season, he's played me right back. He put me on fullback, and I'm 1v1 defending I can't do. To be fair, I'm good at interceptions. I can read the play. 1v1 defending, yeah, that
it's not.
I got to work on it. I'd probably say 50, not 30.
Okay, let's do 50 again. Let's boost that rating up. We don't want to have 30s on your FIFA card. And last but not least, physicality. What would that be?
99. No.
Yes. No.
No, man. Yeah, I could use my body, but I'm definitely not. I'm not a bully, so I'd say solid 80.
I think there needs to be a day where I rate my own FIFA card. I want to know what I'll give myself, but I think my physicality.
I would love to see that.
Well, I think my physicality would be quite high for sure. Now, going
Right.
last question from me. Ange Postecoglou this season, or Ange, how do people say it? Some people say I'm crazy for calling him Ange Postecoglou, but whatever. This season, Tottenham's first game, Leicester City tonight, and Ange Postecoglou said in his press conference, his second season, I usually win things. What do you think will be for Tottenham this season? Is there a chance for them to win a trophy? What can Ange achieve for Tottenham?
Absolutely. I'm backing him for sure. I think at least top four.
Yeah.
I think Ange was quite unlucky last season with injuries. I think Spurs suffered a lot of injuries midway, and they were doing quite well. Weren't they at the top of the league for some point?
Gio, they're always at the top of the league, regardless of the manager. There's probably about there's about 4 or 5
That's
weeks
true.
into the season. Spurs are top for about at least 2 weeks, and it's going to happen this
That's
season. I'm
true.
calling it, but yeah, they were top of the league last season. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, I think if Ange has a good squad. I think if he's lucky with injuries, they can definitely challenge.
I don't think they're a world-class squad. I still think there's a lot of time in them. I think Maddison's still not a world-class player. Solanke's certainly not a world-class player. I don't think anyone in that Tottenham side is a world-class player, and I still think that they need to improve, and I don't know where they need to improve, but I think they've got 2 good defenders in Romero van der Ven. They've got a good enough goalkeeper in Vicario. I think he can really prove himself, and he's 24 or 25. You don't really want to sell a player that young in goal. But there's something in, I think they're missing one not professional player, they're missing one elite player that can really take this team forward, because I still think a lot of the players are injury prone. Brennan Johnson, Dejan Kulusevski, Maddison has got a long-term injury in him as well. Udogi had an injury in him last season. And I think these players under Ange can play really well, but I also think under Ange, regardless of the manager, I think there's a lot of injury prone players in that team. So final words, what do you think the result will be tonight against Leicester City?
Oof. Leicester, Leicester are fresh up from the champ, so I don't know. I think they're a good side. I've always loved Leicester. I'm gonna go 2-0 Spurs.
Yeah, I think we're 2-0. And for me, though, you mentioned the Championship. I think is the best season. Not the best season. I'm really mucking up my words there. I really apologise for that.
You're all right.
It's quite early for me.
That's all right.
I think the Championship is the best league in the world. Well, it is really early, but the Championship for me is the best league in the world. I've got a Watford shirt. It's inverted on here. I've got a Watford shirt behind me. What a brilliant team Watford are going to be this season under Tom Cleverley. I think it is the most interesting league in the world. 48 games in less than 11 months. It's unbelievable amount of games. And of course, that's just in the Championship. You mentioned the Carabao Cup, FA Cup, and you never know, a team in the Championship could get to Europe one day. I'm still waiting to see that. Now, for the Championship this season, do you have a favourite Championship team?
Four. Did Southampton get relegated?
No, they're still in the Premier League. They're in the Premier League. They were promoted.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would say Sunderland is still there, eh?
Yeah, Sunderland are up there still.
I'd love to see Sunderland back in the Prem. I'm
going. Not Watford, no.
I'm going. Nah, I do like Watford. Pochettino.
Yeah, I was going to say that's what I know for.
Man, that I'll never forget that. Yeah, but Sunderland, I watched on Netflix. Sunderland Till I Die. You've probably seen it too, and
that was good.
Seeing how much the club means to the people of Sunderland, that just gave me it formed a soft spot for me for that club. Yeah,
for sure.
I wish them all the best, and they've been through a lot, and I hope they see the Prem again.
Well, under Michael Beale, it was a bit of a circus under him, really, wasn't it? I think Watford this season are going to do what they do every single season and have a few good months. The manager gets sacked by Christmas. They have another interim manager. They get rid of him. And then it is a circus at Watford just as much as it is at Sunderland right now as well. But of course, I wish all the clubs the best this season. And where do you think Tottenham will finish? You mentioned top 4. Would it be 4th, 3rd, 1st, 2nd?
Yeah, I think 4th.
Yes, I think that's fair. I think there's a big gap between 3rd and 4th. And I think Tottenham haven't quite yet bridged that gap. Gio, what a pleasure it's been. Over an hour talking to you about your whole career, built you a FIFA card, speaking about the juvenile ball that of course you're going to remember for the rest of your life. Ethnic followings. I think that was a really cool part of the show where you mentioned about some clubs having a lot of diverse backgrounds. And of course, that led to some problems with riots and things like that. And yeah, what a pleasure it's been, Gio. And I wish you all the best for that professional deal and contracts in the future.
Thank you so much, Jamie, and love your work. Thank you for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm keen to see your episode too. Learn about your story and your background. I did media at uni. That was my uni degree. So I love all the work you do and big fan of
Appreciate
podcasts
it.
and video making. So that's a lot of work, man. So yeah, full credit to you, and I look forward to hearing more about you. And yeah, thank you so much.